Hi, it's time for Open Court. We have a conversation with sportswriter Michelle Smith. Here we go. You know, there's been so many of us that are in the business and have taken left turns and other things. So, for those who might not know who you are, where you're at, how would you say assess who you were slash are as a sports writer and who you are now in your other job? So, what's the tweet about Michelle Smith?
Oh God. I was and still am in my deep in my heart and not so deep in my heart, the ink-stained wretch that I was when I began my career, right? My print journalism career is my identity. I had gravitated throughout my career toward women's sports coverage, which brought me a lot of traction, a lot of happiness, a lot of feeling good about the subjects I was covering, the athletes I was covering. But the business is difficult and I needed to take the left turn. And Joanne, you said it, we all have to take those left turns. Many of us do. The business was difficult. And so made a decision to move my career in another direction into public education. And I don't regret it, but I miss our old life all the time. I know I'm fully aware that I miss what we used to have and the way our jobs used to be, and maybe not the way that they are today. I am not unaware of that, but yeah, I am a journalist. Will always be, it's in the veins, man.
It is. And, you said something very interesting. And when I started my career, I was specifically told by some people that were my mentor not to do women's sports or, do them, but don't make it my thing because it would limit my career.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering because, you're in the Bay Area, you have had a lot of strong women coming out of there like Tara. I mean, I think there might be something more about where you were at that allowed you to build that platform than maybe me being in Detroit, where there was less opportunity to really carve out that niche. I don't know. Do you think at all about the situation, the time and the place affecting your ability to tell those stories about women's sports, or was just because you were so good, you brought it to life?
I'm going to be honest. I think it did limit my career, and I made that choice. Like I don't want to say that it didn't. I have a bucket list of things. I've still never covered an Olympics, and everybody else I know has had a chance to go to the Olympic Games, right? And I've never been to the Olympics, and it was something that I always wanted to do. We had the wonderful opportunity, you and I, to be together at the Women's World Cup in 2011, which seems like a million years ago now. But that was a first of that kind of thing for my career. I had kids when I was fairly young. I had a husband in the business. I think all of those things contributed to limiting my career options, because there were jobs that I wouldn't take, wouldn't apply for, wasn't going to pick up and move out of town and leave my support system. Like there are all those things. And I think that covering women's sports to a degree limited the other things that I was able to do in my career. And there was a point where that bothered me because I didn't want to stop doing the women's sports stuff, but I wanted the cake and I wanted to eat it. And then at some point I had to make peace with it and say, this is the thing I know. This is the place where I'm passionate. And so that's okay. I mean, I have, a dear friend and colleague who I won't name, but who, when I had a conversation with her about why she wasn't going to a specific game at one point, she said, look, I'm not going to marginalize my career by only doing women's sports, which felt a little bit like a stake to the heart in that moment. It's a hard thing to hear. I don't know if I marginalize my career, but I definitely don't want to, in the big picture, as I have like 30 years looked back on, I want to acknowledge the reality that covering women's sports didn't allow me to elevate my brand, my name, my career, maybe to the point that other people went or that other people got to. I felt like I did it. I felt like I did it well. I felt like I carved out a space for myself. I felt like I really enjoyed what I did. I got to travel. I got to go to Final Fours and travel on beats and go do really cool things that I would never be sad about. But I think I made a career choice there. And to say that it didn't have any impact on the trajectory of my sports writing career is probably not real.
Yeah, no, and these women, I will say this, they were women who were my mentors. They had made it and they're just like, look, we made deliberate choices not to, actively write about women or cover women. I mean, with the Olympics, obviously they did it, but they were not pursuing Title IX things outside of context of an event. And they're like, the only way you're going to move up the ladder and get get paid, get your name, however you want, is, that you're covering Super Bowls and that you're at the Olympics and that you're, at the Final Fours or the Stanley Cups. And, I think I was too young to fully understand what they were saying. But what I did realize as my career progressed was, because I was usually the only woman everywhere I worked, or one of two, that the women's issues seemed to fall on me. So like, oh, well, there's a female athlete, you cover it, or there's a Title IX thing, you cover it, or I, as I was joking, I was on the emo beat, like, oh, well, there's a sick high school athlete, we'll send you because you're really good with talking to them. And, it's like, oh, that's what they were talking about. Now I see it, because it was nothing gender specific about what we were doing, but it's like, it fell onto me. And I thought, oh, but obviously with me covering the NBA and the rest, I kind of got to dip back and forth. But, I think that is a decision that I don't think many men have to actively make.
No,
because number one, they won't be put in that position of only covering women's stuff usually. But number two, we have to say what it is. Men will not get judged by what they cover because of their gender.
Right.
Is that fair?
Totally. And, and in the big picture, I don't know, in retrospect, it feels a little bit like high school in only this sense, like where you said you were going to college and what clothes you wore, and like all of those themes seem really important until the moment you graduated, and then nobody cares anymore. Like when I look back at my career of 30 years, I'm not without wishing that I could have gotten to cover an Olympics or whatever, but in 30 years later, doesn't really matter. I've had a successful career. I've had a really rich career. I've gotten to do a lot of great things, even after my career change at, the age of 48 or whatever it was, which was, not an easy thing to do. And it had mostly to do with identity and shifting that and mourning identity and all of that. But, in the big picture, I look at my resume and I go, I'd hire her.
I'd hire you too. Wait a second.
You did.
I did. So, but that's, I think these are all, small but important conversations I try to have with my students of like the things you think that matter, collecting the lines, what is your happiness? What is your priorities? At the end of the day, when you're left with it, do you want people to ooh and ah that you're at the Super Bowl? I mean, does that even matter compared to getting to do other work? And obviously it's hard to rationalize that when you're, 22 and just wanting to make it. But, I think these things have value. And for you, the loss of identity, I think that's something a lot of us have had to reconcile with, more importantly, in the context that you mentioned of the way things used to be. And, I think we're both in a very strange place in that we're young enough to make a career shift into something else, but we're old enough to know how things used to be.
Right.
And that's kind of an interesting burden that I think only a very narrow slice have. And I guess, so what do you miss the most, and how have you now, transitioned yourself into your new identity and find enjoyment in it?
Yeah. What do I miss the most? I mean, I miss being at a big event that's got a lot of energy and a lot of my colleagues and a full press box and just sort of that fun and the excitement and banging something out on deadline that's a big deal. And, like just those big events, and even being lucky enough, even once I made the career change, to go to a few Final Fours in a row after that, when, which is the big event and the courtside seat and the energy and all of that. But I miss seeing my colleagues. I miss interacting with people, because as we well know, sports journalists are the smartest, weirdest, quirkiest, but, thoroughly most interesting group of people and loyal group of people you can have as colleagues and friends for the most part, right? Yep. And so I miss seeing them. I miss their, I miss this awful, horrible jokes that, go around in the press box that you would just be mortified if anybody heard you talk, right? Like, I miss all of that about kind of that sports writer life. And, and then I just miss being at big events. Like I watch things happen. I go, oh, I wish I was covering that. Oh, it would be fun to cover that. I mean, I've been just as recently as yesterday, South Carolina's playing UConn in the Bahamas. And I know some friends who were there covering. And I was like, like it's a big game today. I really just miss sitting there and covering the event. But you and I also know this part about it, again, being in that small slice of time, but covering the event, watching the game, keeping play-by-play, keeping track of what's going on, and not going, oh, I missed that play because I was busy tweeting about it, right? Like, or whatever. I mean, like the whole thing is different. And so that just makes me sound like, the old, just makes me sound old, frankly. But the whole thing is really different. So the things I miss about it are the people and the energy and all of those things. But, but it's also a lot of hard work now. And you're never, these magical phones that we've got, you're never off work.
No.
You're never not expected to have something up on Twitter if you find out about it. You're never not, there's just no off switch. And so for these young journalists who are in this space to understand that there's no off switch for them, like, I don't know, it's difficult. I'm not sure I'd be, I'm sure that if I was still doing it, I'd be grousing about it to no end.
But that's
sure.
also,
I have no doubt that I'd be complaining to anyone who would listen about how my job looks great, but really it sucks.
But I hate to say that, I think that is the eternal truth of any sports writer, that no matter what the circumstances were, there will be complaining. So that's
oh, for sure.
Yeah, but that's the one thing I do see with my, our friends that are still in the business. It's like, yeah, that's great they're doing it. But it's like, oh my God, it's too much, they're exhausted and there's no help, because everything is so trimmed back. And, and then you're dealing with the public, good, bad, or otherwise. They're supposed to bang on a podcast and edit some videos. So, it's a lot. It's a lot. And, the people that do it very well have my respect and admiration, because it is an amazing tightrope. And, and for me, coming from the NBA perspective, the season's such a grind. And, then you throw in the COVID protocols on top of it, and, players not wanting to talk, for different reasons. It's a lot. It's a lot. So it's fascinating to me to see how things have changed yet stay the same, because, if you report stuff, you break news. I mean, that's a high. And that's the thing that I really stuck in my head from one of my friends who retired, said, what I'm going to miss the most is the adrenaline rush. I'm going to miss the adrenaline rush. I'm going to miss the feeling that, yeah, I nailed it. Because he said, never, anything I did after journalism never gave me that feeling. Like I was satisfied and I was happy, but I didn't feel like I'd won something.
Right. You write a great game story, and then after that, you go to bed and you just lay there and you cannot sleep.
Yeah.
And, and your flight leaves in
At
3
4
hours.
It's like, should I even go to sleep? And then here's the danger now. Well, I'll just doom scroll. I'll just go on Netflix, so yeah. And that's what I think is interesting, is that people, are so quick to say, the media did this wrong and gotcha. But, I don't think there's enough appreciation or understanding of how hard doing it right really is, and how, as I explained to my students, I said, I feel like almost sports writers, the really good ones, are like stand-up comedians on improv night. They go up there in front of a crowd, just test out materials. Either you land or you fail, but you own it. It's just it's you alone in front of everybody. And, now with the gotcha on social media, I mean, God forbid you do have a mistake in a running gamer, or God forbid that you, had the Wi-Fi crash and your laptop crashed, you, by the grace of God, you got it up, and there was something wrong. There's no appreciation for the stress that went into it. But, that's, I guess, what our jobs are. Nobody, the most famous complaint from Shelby Strother from the Detroit News was, nobody wants to hear about the labor pains. They just want to see the pretty baby. So
that's right.
Understood.
Absolutely true.
So in terms of the evolution of women's sports, and I think you probably have one of the best handles on this in terms of perspective, a lot of us are talking about how there isn't enough progress. We have so much farther to go. And, we can name 15 examples, from the abuse of coaches to the pay to the marketing. But I want to focus on the flip. I think we have come a long way, and seeing like Dawn Staley's contract, and seeing the TV ratings, and seeing people, really taking a real interest in the WNBA. And then obviously seeing someone like Tara Vanderveer at Stanford, having an amazing career and having to build a legacy without being labeled as the women's coach. Everyone respects her as one of the best coaches in basketball, period. How do you assess the good versus the bad? Are you half empty or half full for the glass?
It's all there. Both things can be true at the same time. I think there are, I think part of the bad that we're seeing is also part of the good, and the empowerment in these young female athletes to speak up about their experience, and to be able to say out loud about the situations they're experiencing with coaching, and not just assuming that they're, that's, they're just lucky to have a job, and however they get treated is how they get treated. Like, I think the bad is part of the good at this point. I think the good is, I think one of the good things that I'm seeing happening is the way that business is starting to embrace women's sports. I think that's one of the best things, actually, because I think that women's sports advocates have always embraced women's sports. That should go without saying, but right, there's, there's been, people have always advocated, for themselves. The WNBA has been telling you for 25 years that it's a great league with incredible talent, but where was that message going, and what were the barriers to getting that message to go further? And I think one of the biggest things is business. I think one of the biggest things is having, I know this is a Facebook platform, but let's talk, Twitter and Facebook have both, decided that they're going to participate in airing WNBA games. It gives it a different platform, right? There's more games on, there's more networks, all of a sudden ABC's back in the mix because they've got the business and the sponsors to back it up. You've got companies like Google who've decided to get into with women's sports in the WNBA. You have the NIL opportunities now for student athletes, which is, as an OG, I'm a little afraid, but I also know what a tremendous opportunity is for business to become further invested in female athletes. Right. And so to me, that's the biggest part of the sea change, is that it's become good business, and it wasn't always like that. And so, I think the bad is a reflection of the good and the empowerment of these female athletes. And then the fact that somebody finally figured out that women's sports is good business. And I hope that, that's a trajectory and not a fad, right? Like, I hope it's not that people have decided it's good business for a couple more years, but, and the fact that they think it's good business, God, I want to say this right, not in spite of the WNBA players' activism, but that didn't scare anybody away.
Right. Well, because women that embrace their power are scary in our society. We can name 15 examples, but women that are athletic and of color, there's, and maybe not straight. There's a lot of layers to this that scare a lot of Main Street business people. And I think one of the things that has given me heart is the people that are involved now are involved for a capitalistic reason, and not because it's a charity case. We're going to help the girls.
It's not a cause. Right thing to do.
Right. That's the thing. It's not cause-driven marketing. It's like, wait a second. If we can sell a bunch of Vandersloot jerseys, I want to be there and I want to sell it. Let's go. Or if we can sell a bunch of Megan Rapinoe gear and all these little boys in Omaha, Nebraska want to buy it, let's go. So, reducing the veneer, the pink, as I call it, the pink haze, the pink glory off of it, just hey, guess what? It's good business. But I love that women's team sports are being embraced. And I think you've taken down the individual athletes. I'm glad that, the Serenas and the rest, get paid. But now that you can spread the money into a whole league and a whole team, it's going to lift everybody, not just the superstars. Right. And, I really think that people don't realize that it's this country, it's the United States, it's North America that's leading this, because we know South America, still disrespects even, their great soccer athletes. Europe, hit or miss, and obviously other countries have religious or value-based, things going on that will stop women from being marquee athletes. But all the conditions are here right now for this to work. And man, I just I can't believe it took this long though. We're almost 50 years into Title IX. And now we're just talking about.
I know better than that now. We wish it hadn't taken this long, but I can believe it took this long. I wish it hadn't, but I can believe it took this long. And then the conversations, and then the kind of conversations that are happening among the athletes. We talk about which athletes we're uplifting. I'll go back to the WNBA as an example of a league that is predominantly a league of Black women, and the degree to which, some of those voices now, Renee Montgomery and Asia Wilson, and being concerted about uplifting the voices of Black women in that league that are powerful, have great stories to tell. And we're having those conversations. I'm okay with the conversation about, does Sabrina Ionescu get too much attention related in comparison to an Asia Wilson? I'm okay with that conversation because we're having it.
Absolutely.
Right? That's, it's not always, those are not comfortable spaces. And I have, for one, had to learn how to get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. I am, I do very much feel like, at this point, I am kind of an OG in the space. There's a lot of things that I don't talk about because I think it's not my space anymore. And some of these issues are not my space anymore. I think it's a conversation. I think it's conversation for people who are more in it than I am. I also sort of understand that, I mean, my days as an influencer or to the potential to be an influencer are way back there. Like, right. Like, I mean, like, it's real. I mean, I think I can be, I can be a wily veteran. I can be Bull Durham. I can be, in this scenario, I can be Kevin Costner. Not, just saying, but I don't know. It's just a very interesting space to occupy. And I will not lie that I feel like there's a little bit of time when this whole thing is just running past me at a rate faster than I can catch up with it, because I'm not in it every day anymore. That's the other part of, doing what we do in these different spaces that we're doing them now, is I'm not in it every day anymore. I'm not in a space to break news. I do my freelance work for the Pac-12 and the WNBA. I'm writing feature stories and telling stories and making sure that I'm shining spotlights on individual players and work and things like that. But I'm not breaking news. I'm not in that space anymore. I'm not in the, I mean, there's just certain spaces I'm not in anymore. And so I will happily occupy the space that I occupy and watch it all get better and watch it all get more interesting and watch it all get more attention, and do it happily and say that hopefully somewhere in the beginning of all of that, I played a part in helping it build up.
No, you did. You absolutely did. And I'm wondering, obviously media is a loaded word because it's, how people define media, whether it's Joe Blow in his basement blogging versus the New York Times versus TMZ versus, podcasts, whatever. I'm wondering if the progress we're seeing in the rise of stature and the conversations about the roles women occupy in sports is ever truly going to take a real turn into sports media, because I don't feel we're making progress. I really don't. In terms of overall sports media. I mean, we don't have as many people as women we need in charge of things. We have very few women as sports editors. I mean, I know that's old school, but I think the influence, because the bluntness is the generation that should be in charge right now is us.
Mm-hmm.
We're all the ones that had to take a different path to make it. Mm-hmm. And I can drop a list right now of 10 of us that would be amazing managers, columnists, and however you want to quantify it. We should still be in the game, but we're not in the game, which means our voice, our influence is not being felt the same way. And I've had this conversation with others. It's like there's the OGs that are still in the game, and then there's the people that are in their 20s and 30s. But the gap between like 35 and 55, that's been the great.
Right, because all of us had to go make a living, Joanne, because it wasn't paying the bills. I mean,
right.
That is the reality about sports media. And I will say, if we're still talking about women's basketball, specifically women's basketball media, the reality is I can probably literally count on one hand the people who are making a full-time living covering women's basketball.
Yep.
Literally. I mean, if I was rattling off names, Michelle Vopel is still working full-time at ESPN. Doug Feinberg is the national AP women's basketball writer. Get me past that. And that's not talking about like a beat writer, an individual, but in the big picture covering women's basketball, people can't make a living. So many people I know who are in that internet space, who are working, have other jobs, and they still pay their way to go cover events. And they still are running their own blogs or their own sites, and they've built up their own following, whatever. Too many people, because the landscape changed, right? Like there's still newspaper beat writers. There's still somebody like Jeff Metcalf in Arizona who just retired, but who covered Arizona sports forever and ever. Amen. In Hartford, you're still going to have, they're still going to cover UConn as a beat, and they're going to send somebody on the road, and they're still going to travel them or whatever. But in between, there's not a lot. And so that's the problem, particularly at the collegiate level, in a different way at the WNBA level, although folks are carving out their WNBA spaces in different ways. You've got that whole, the hashtag WNBA Twitter and those folks that have made a name for them, but they're not making with few exceptions, with a couple of exceptions, they're not making a living. And that you hit a point in the middle of your career where you can't just do that anymore. Like you can't work freelance and wait by the mailbox for the check to show up or for it to show up in your direct deposit for something that you did 2 months ago. And when you've got rent to pay and bills to pay and kids to put through college and all of those like real realities, right? So, a lot of us made turns because the business got too hard and it simply wasn't going to be a viable way to make a living.
Right.
And, and so, and it's still, women's sports is still, in my mind, from a media perspective, not a viable way to make a living. And that's a problem.
No, I agree. And it's, it was niche before, we'll just say it, for major American media, it was niche. And, I mean, tennis was eliminated, golf's been eliminated, women's sports has been eliminated, auto racing's been eliminated. I mean, look at all the things that have been peeled off, and everything's been distilled down to the majors, with the pro sports. And then if there's an event in your town, maybe you cover that. And then, maybe a few big colleges and then high schools, and that's it. The rest of it's just been kind of farmed off. And that's the problem of, when you have conversations with people, oh, the media doesn't care, they're not covering. It's like, it's much more nuanced than that. We do care. We just don't have the bodies to do it, or the budget to do it, or the landscape to do it. And at some point, something gave, and you're right. That's what gave, and it's not right. I can't defend it, but here we are.
Well, when you're being, when you're getting paid $75 a story, and like, I'm not saying I'm happy that we have outlets that are trying to invest and give young writers a chance and pay them something rather than asking them to work for free, right? Or next to for free. I have the old story about the NCAA, for the love of Mike, who asked me to write a 2,000-word story for their Final Four program and offered me $200. The NCAA. It's like, the work, but it's what people consider the value of the work, right? I mean, I know I may be headed off into a different place, but what I'm just saying is that making a living covering, for the most part, making a living covering women's sports is almost impossible unless you're doing something else. You've got some other iron in the fire. You've got a specific business, relationship that's allowing you to do this. And so but social media is free. It's democratic as hell, and that anybody who's interested can hop in and have a take and build a following and all of those things. It doesn't replace coverage. It's not the same. It's conversation, but it's not coverage.
Right. No, it's breadth, but it's not depth. And, there is a difference in the nuance and, being with a team and covering them and getting to know them and, just being able to look at them and realize something's off, all those little nuances that we bring. So for you though, what do you think is the next step? We've got money is in the college game now. There's a cat. We have money in the college game now. Right. So we're getting more men, picking up coaching gigs left and right. WNBA, is kind of, what do you see as the next step for, obviously the women's basketball space? Are we kind of waiting for the next big jump up, or do you think it's going to be more incremental spread out as we've been seeing?
I see the league, the WNBA in particular, wanting to make hiring former players now a priority. I think we're seeing that. Vicki Johnson, the Atlanta just hired a former player as a coach whose name at this moment in my head is just escaping me because, again, I'm old. But I think the WNBA is wanting to make space for its former players to play big roles. I mean, it'll be super interesting for me to see in the next couple of years, however it comes out, to see what roles Diana and Sue play in the league, whether they decide that they want to do it as owners or GMs, or whether they don't want to do it. I mean, that'll be interesting too, right? But two of the most legendary players in the game who are who are pretty close to their retirement, figuring out how they're going to be involved in the league. Like, I think that the WNBA is really prioritizing that. I don't see the college game prioritizing that pretty much at all. I see the college game still being very much a product of who's going to get hired. I see some of the smaller schools, like the ones that are just outside of the Big Five, who are the ones who are taking chances on hiring, new head coaches and people who haven't been, hiring people, new faces and things like that, if you consider that taking a chance. But yeah, I mean, among the Power Fives, I just don't see enough. I don't see enough risk taking. I don't see enough, I don't know, somebody like Adia Barnes at Arizona. Like, Adia Barnes was an alum. She was the all-time leading scorer. She had been at Washington when Washington went to a Final Four. Adia Barnes was a great hire. Was she a risky hire in the context of the job that she was taking and whatever? I don't think she was, but has it worked out for them spectacularly? Absolutely. She's a name now. She's a voice. She's, it's so, a voice like that will help, encourage other people to do something similar. I don't know. I just don't see the collegiate game moving in that way. I see the WNBA moving that way. I don't see the collegiate game moving that way. I think there's money. We'll see how much with the NIL thing, we'll see how much sort of power student athletes can amass in all of this, and what degree they have the leverage to move a needle. I don't know. It's too early to tell.
Well, and I'm kind of with you too in the OG thing with the NIL, because my concern was, and I do have, quite a few student athletes, male and female in my classes, that I don't want them to feel they have to sell themselves inappropriately to get deals. So I'll say it like Barstool or some of the other more nefarious outlets that are looking to sign people. It's like, yeah, you're going to get a check, but what are they asking you to do? I mean, how far do you want to push this, or what's the messaging? And, I don't see much guidance from athletic departments in telling them kind of like, hey, this might seem really cool now when you're 19, but let's think about the big picture. Did you, what did you sell your soul for? But conversely, I also don't see the power structure within athletic departments, which we must fully say is predominantly male. And usually in the big schools, it's run by football and basketball, men's basketball. And the other thing too is, schools that still have an SWA, a senior women's administrator, it's still siloing the entire process of hiring these big things. So if you're saying that the women's athletic department is separate than the men's athletic department, when this is a hire that you're probably using a search firm for, which has already been rigged from the inside to some degree by the known candidates, it's like you can't get a different outcome if the algorithm is already static going in. So I agree with you.
NIL is so new, and I worry that I have a very maternal worry for some of these kids, just in the sense that there aren't enough people to give you good guidance, because nobody is good enough at this yet. Nobody's seen enough of it and experienced enough of it, and who's going to be able to give you really good guidance. There are going to be some athletes, some pretty high profile athletes, who will get good guidance about how to handle NIL. And then I think there's going to be some kids out there that are going to be flailing and make some not good decisions because they don't get good advice, because there aren't enough people who know this well enough yet to be good sources of information for them.
Well, simple fact, and I learned this on my own, if you take a nice NIL deal, we'll make you on a big time team, you have to pay taxes. You have to pay taxes. So at 19 years old or 20 years old or 21, you have to figure out quarterly tax payments to the IRS on that revenue.
Right.
Really? You think, I'm just waiting 2 years from now to hear that the IRS is coming after somebody with full bore for unpaid taxes. Like, well, I didn't know. I was 19. I was in college. Why was I supposed to pay just, quarterly taxes on income?
Right.
Well,
right.
No one told me. Well, guess what? It's going to come. So I'll wrap it up with this. In terms of anything that you would like to do, obviously I know you're happy with what you're doing now, but is there anything that you still have left that you really want to do before you say, I'm cool, I'm done with this journalism thing? Is there a book in you or something?
There are probably a couple of books in me. I still would really love to do an Olympics. I haven't completely written that off. I understand that that's when you're doing a different job, that's going to require a different level of maneuvering in your career life, but I haven't completely written it off, because I'd still love to do it at some point. Paris doesn't sound bad.
Paris sounds beautiful.
Paris sounds fantastic.
Let's go.
So there's that. But yeah, I have a couple of books in me. Like, there are still some really good stories to tell. Yeah, I'm not done being a journalist yet. But what's really been interesting is, working in public education, and this has been like this has just been the hardest 21 months of my career in just its own way, because of the constant shifts and and I live in a place in the Bay Area, which has been probably much more compliant generally to masking and vaccine and testing and all of those things that I know that other districts and other places around the country are experiencing a much higher level of resistance than I think that we've gotten here in the Bay Area and in Alameda County. But the thing that it sort of illuminated for me is it's really brought inequity and the students that have resources and the students that don't have resources, and how all this has impacted them, and how those that don't have resources or good communications vehicles or whatever, that this has really been sort of, without exaggerating, like life or death, right? Like, we're still trying to figure out how to get into some of our zip codes in some areas, in Oakland and in other areas where there are large immigrant populations, where the undocumented families don't want to come out of the woodwork to get a shot because they don't want to expose their paperwork or their immigration status, and they're really fearful, or we're not translating things into the right languages. Right. And, and there's all these different languages being spoken, and we're trying to get all this information out, and we're not hitting the mark because we're not getting it in the right language languages to the right communities, pockets of the community where this are life and death, where COVID's coming into a household where there's 7 or 8 people living and go running through the entire household, and kids are being held out of school and things like. This is serious business. This is about more than being pissed that you have to wear a mask or your kid has to wear a mask at recess, right? Like, so those are the things that have made this really, it's why I'm sitting here on Thanksgiving week in my sweatshirt and I'm chilling and I'm watching Gilmore Girls marathons and because your brain needs a break from understanding how critical this work is. And so, my journalism work, I love it. I'll never not love it. I think there's incredible nobility in telling the stories of female athletes and helping to elevate women's sports. And I need to figure out how I can get, some really specific language translations into a couple neighborhoods in Oakland next week, because we got to tell those parents to go get their kids vaxxed. And it's just completely opposite ends of the spectrum.
Well, that's nothing like some life and death stuff to, invade your life.
Perspective, right.
No, but the great thing though is, and this is, I think the thing that people don't realize about journalists, we do have skills. We're very good communicators. We know how to research. We know how to process information. We know how to reach audiences. We know how to ask questions to get the information we need. So all of that is helping you, do this critical work that you're doing right now. I mean,
yeah,
I think you're exactly where you need to be right now with your skills. I mean, you're helping people.
Yeah, I feel like I am. Yeah. And then I can pine for the other stuff. I can pine for the old days,
Yes.
I'll just, sit on my porch and yell at children to get off my lawn and pine for the old days. Right.
We'll set up a little altar to trash 80s and have a little seance with that. But,
that's right.
Hey, well, this was awesome. Thank you so much. This makes me so happy. Thanks for watching Open Court. Please remember to like and subscribe to us. Address to follow.